The first warning was the sky. At 2:14 local, Auspex alarms wailed across every trench and strong point. The heavens above, once a black dome broken only by flares and streaking lasfire, erupted into fire. Thousands of incandescent trails cut through the atmosphere, each one a falling star that screamed of doom. Mycetic spores, living pods of chitin and flesh, plummeted toward the surface in numbers beyond comprehension. "Impact in 60 seconds, the tech marine intoned, his McCann dendrites flexing as he interfaced with the Auspex. His calm metallic voice was inhumanly steady. "Vectors, entire hemisphere. This is not an incursion. This is planetary consumption." Captain Veros's response was iron. "Then we begin the counter-consumption. Prepare all units for impact." The ground shook violently as the first spores struck. Massive sacs ruptured on impact, disgorging creatures by the dozen, gaunts shrieking as they scrambled across the dirt, gargoyle broods unfurling wings slick with ichor, and other shapes too grotesque to describe, their forms shifting as though the biomass had not yet decided what horrors they would become. The Imperial Guard artillery fired desperately, basilisks belching thunder, earth shakers sending flaming shells into the descending rain. Many spores burst mid-air, scattering burning fragments and writhing chitin across the battlefield. But for every one destroyed, 100 landed intact. Sergeant Karsk felt the trench shake beneath him as a pod slammed down only 50 meters away, cracking open like an egg. A Carnifex clawed its way free, towering over the trench line, its carapace steaming, its eyes glowing with predatory malice. "Saints above," whispered Private Bren, his lasgun shaking in his grip. "Fire!" Karsk roared. Dozens of las beams struck the beast, scarring its armor but failing to bring it down. Heavy bolt of fire slammed into its chest, detonating chunks of flesh, but still it advanced, bellowing a roar that rattled the bones of every man in the trench. The Carnifex charged. And it was met head-on by the Angels of Death. Assault Marines ignited their packs, soaring up and around the beast. Chainswords hacked at joints, power fists smashed into chitin, and meltaguns burned glowing holes into its hide. The monster flailed, crushing one Marine against the earth with a swipe of its claws, but the others pressed the attack relentlessly. Finally, Captain Veros himself leapt into the fray, his relic blade cleaving deep into the Carnifex's skull. It fell with an earth-shaking crash, ichor spraying like a fountain. For a fleeting moment, the trench erupted in cheers, but the victory was drowned in the chorus of 1,000 more screeches. Everywhere, spores burst open and fresh nightmares poured forth. Warriors with bone swords and lash whips, broods of gaunts carrying symbiotic guns that spat acid, gargoyles swarming the skies in chittering clouds. The Imperial Guard fought with desperate professionalism. Heavy weapon teams rotated fire with precision, las cannons cutting through warriors, flamers vomiting burning promethium into choked choke points. Commissars executed those who wavered, their bolt pistols barking, reminders of Imperial discipline. Still, the swarm pressed in. Brother Altheon's heavy bolter roared until the barrels smoked, shells tearing through flesh and bone in an endless storm. "He will not yield," he thundered, voice amplified across the line. "The wall holds." And for a time it did. But then came the shock of the ground itself splitting apart. Entire sections of trench collapsed as burrowing creatures, raveners, erupted from below, dragging screaming guardsmen into the earth. Vox units shrieked with overlapping cries, dozens of squads overwhelmed at once. Karsk shot one of the beasts point blank, its head detonating in a spray of gore. But another burst up beside him, jaws snapping. Only a bolt round from Veros's plasma pistol saved him, vaporizing the monster in a burst of blue fire. "Stay alive, Sergeant. You will need to tell others how men fight when gods stand among them." Karsk swallowed hard, nodded, and raised his lasgun again. Above them, the spores still fell. The night sky had become a rain of monsters, and in the far distance, silhouetted against fire and ruin, something vast stirred in the dark.
The Auspex was never wrong. Its machine spirits might whisper static and bleed false echoes across the screen, but when the lines danced in unison and the green blips spread like infection, only one conclusion remained. Something was moving beneath the earth. Sergeant Karsk leaned over the operator's shoulder, eyes narrowing at the pulsing signatures. "How many?" he asked, his voice low, heavy. The operator's fingers hovered above the console, hesitant to speak. "Dozens. No, hundreds. The machine spirit reads them as life forms, but the patterns, they're too ordered. It's not a migration. They're advancing." Karsk swore under his breath. He knew beasts. He had fought orcs who thundered across plains like a living tide, and he had watched feral packs of Xenos hounds tear through stragglers in hive rubble. But this was coordination, purpose, predation made manifest. He flicked his Vox to long range. "Command, this is Line Squad Vostroya, Sector 7. Underground contacts, unknown signatures, advancing fast." Static, then a garbled voice broken by shrieking feedback. "Command, repeat, contact, reinforcements en route, hold." The signal died with a screech that made every man's teeth ache. One guardsman crossed himself, muttering a prayer. Another tightened the strap on his lasgun, the click of metal harsh in the silence. The stillness did not last long. A scream cracked the night, faint, distant, carried on the cold air. It was joined by the sound of laser fire, sharp cracks echoing from the hills. Red tracer beams streaked against the darkness, brief, desperate flashes of resistance. Then silence again. "Scouting party," Karsk muttered. He spat into the dirt. "They're gone." The squad shifted uneasily. These were hardened soldiers, their fur-lined Vostroyan coats already stiff with ash and mud from other wars. But something in that sudden silence gnawed at them. Even veterans of the guard understood fear when it slithered unseen beneath their boots. The Auspex operator spoke again, voice cracking. "Sergeant, they're closer now. Sector 6, moving fast." Karsk took a long breath, tasting the copper of recycled air and the smoke of his crushed low stick still lingering. He barked orders with the precision of habit. Defensive formation, bayonets fixed, eyes sharp. If you see it move, burn it down. Las guns hummed as power cells locked in place. Men formed ranks, a wall of flesh and faith against the unknown. The guardsmen stood shoulder to shoulder in the dim glow of lumen strips, their breath misting in the cold. Then the ground shifted. It began as a tremor, small enough that one might mistake it for the growl of distant artillery, but then the earth cracked, dry soil splitting as something forced its way up. Chitin glistened wet in the moonlight, a shape both insect and nightmare. A termagant burst forth, screeching, its alien throat vibrating with hunger. A second followed, then 3 more, claws tearing soil and teeth gnashing. "Fire!" Karsk roared. The line lit up with laser fire. Red beams seared into the gaunts, burning holes through carapace, splintering alien bone. The first collapsed mid-scream, thrashing in the dirt before dissolving into stillness. The second staggered, chest a smoldering ruin, before another volley dropped it lifeless. But more came. Always more. Dozens clawed from the earth, scrambling over their dead, shrieking with a sound that was neither beast nor machine. The guardsmen fought like professionals, each man moving with discipline born of endless drills, short bursts, aimed fire, conserve power cells. Sergeant Karsk's commands cut through the chaos, his voice calm, measured, as if the swarm was just another drill. Competence carried them through the first wave. Bodies piled at the lip of the trench, steaming in the night air, the stench of burning chitin cloying. The men did not break, but the auspex screamed again. The operator's voice wavered. "Sergeant, more contacts, hundreds, surrounding us!" Karsk's jaw tightened. His heart thundered in his chest, but he did not show it. "Then we hold. Vox for support again. Someone out there is hearing this." He didn't believe it. And in the far hills, where the first scouts had vanished, Vox static whispered with alien laughter. From the black skies above, salvation came roaring like thunder. Drop pods tore through the atmosphere, their hulls burning bright against the void. The impact shook the trenches, steel screaming as the ground itself quaked. For the guardsmen below, it was both a blessing and a grim reminder. When the angels of death descended, the threat was never small. Sergeant Karsk steadied himself against the trench wall as dirt rained down. His men glanced skyward, awe etched across war-weary faces. Even the auspex operator, still pale from terror, whispered the Emperor's name with reverence. The pods split open with explosive force. Hydraulic clamps snapped free, and smoke hissed as armored giants strode forth. 8 feet of ceramite and wrath, each warrior bore the sigil of the Ultramarines upon their shoulder plates. The faint blue of their armor glowed in the dim light, scarred and weathered from countless campaigns, yet pristine with the pride of their chapter. The lead figure raised his helm, revealing a face etched with scars and framed by a cropped mane of dark hair. His voice carried over the chaos, steady as stone. "I am Captain Lucian Varos of the Ultramarines 4th Company. This line is under our protection now. You will not falter. You will not break. By the will of the Emperor, this world shall endure." The guardsmen stood straighter, bolstered not just by the captain's words, but by his presence. To fight alongside the Adeptus Astartes was to stand in the shadow of legends. Karsk felt a heat in his chest, pride mixing with fear. Perhaps they truly could hold the line.
The Space Marines wasted no time. Their discipline was absolute. Within moments, tactical squads took firing positions. Devastators hoisted heavy weapons into place, and a squad of assault marines readied their jump packs, their engines growling like caged predators. A tech marine strode past, mechadendrites unfurling as he interfaced with the trench's Vox systems. His voice was a metallic growl as he recalibrated the auspex. Confirmed contacts. Swarm life forms converging from 3 vectors. Surface incursion imminent. Recommend immediate fire support deployment. As in answer, the horizon erupted in artillery fire. Basilisks thundered, their shells arcing across the sky before slamming into the earth with incandescent fury. The night lit up with firestorms, ground shaking as craters bloomed amidst the oncoming swarm. For a moment, the battlefield was ablaze with human might. And still, the auspex blips multiplied. Brother Alpheon, a devastator marine with eyes like steel, adjusted the sights on his heavy bolter. "They are countless," he rumbled, voice filtered through his Vox grill. "But we are the wall." "Then we shall be the hammer as well," Captain Varos replied. He turned his gaze to Karsk, who felt as though the weight of an entire galaxy bore down on him. "Sergeant, your men will hold the trenches. We will spearhead the counterassault. Coordinate with our Vox. Your discipline will determine if this world survives the dawn." Karsk saluted with rigid precision. "By your command, my lord." Moments later, the swarm revealed itself. From the shattered hills poured Turgaments in their hundreds, shrieking with alien hunger. Behind them lumbered Tyranid warriors, their forms towering, talons dripping ichor, eyes burning with unnatural intellect. Above, the sky split again, not with pods, but with spores. Mycetic sacs hurtled downward, rupturing on impact, birthing horrors of every shape and size. The guard held their line, laser fire crackling in disciplined volleys. The Ultramarines roared prayers and curses as their bolters thundered, explosive shells ripping bodies apart in gory blossoms. Every shot was precise, every movement a lesson in warcraft. Brother Alpheon's heavy bolter chattered death, each round detonating with thunderous finality, shredding entire knots of Turgaments. Assault Marines ignited their jump packs and leapt into the fray, chainsaws roaring as they cleaved through chitin and flesh. Varos himself strode at the center, plasma pistol flaring in one hand, relic blade cutting down monsters with surgical precision in the other. The competence of the Astartes was undeniable. They moved like gods of war, an unbreakable tide against the chitinous swarm. The guardsmen, inspired, fought with renewed vigor. And yet Karsk noticed it first. The way the dead Tyranids were left where they fell, their corpses dissolving into steaming sludge that seeped back into the ground. The swarm did not waste. It reclaimed. It prepared for the next wave. "Captain," he voxed urgently, "they're learning from us." Varos's reply was grim, final. "Of course they are, guardsmen. That is what they do. And it will only get worse." The swarm roared again, louder this time, as if the planet itself cried out in hunger.
The world itself seemed to tense, as though holding its breath before the inevitable storm. Trenches stretched for kilometers, winding scars of dirt and ferrocrete across a barren plain. Voxhail filled the air, reports cascading in from every sector, sightings of gaunts, localized breaches, and whispers of entire settlements gone dark. Captain Varos stood upon the trench parapet, helm in hand, eyes surveying the horizon. His expression was as unyielding as the ceramite he wore. "This planet has already been touched by the great devourer," he said to his lieutenants, voice low but carrying weight. "Civilian populations vanish without trace, the silence of entire hives, all of it feeding the swarm." Beside him, Brother Sergeant Darren adjusted his power sword, the blade humming faintly. "Then this world is already lost." Varos shook his head, slow and deliberate. "No world is lost while one loyal heart beats. Remember that. We are not here to surrender this planet. We are here to teach it how to die well, if die it must." In the trenches, the Astra Militarum prepared for the night. Guardsmen checked lasgun packs, fingers trembling as they slotted charge cells into place. Medicae scribes blessed field dressings. Commissars prowled like wolves, their presence both reassurance and threat. One misplaced word, one falter in duty, and a bolt round would silence dissent. Fear was a weapon as much as any lasgun. Sergeant Karsk walked the line, boots crunching in dirt, voice steady as he inspected his men. "Keep your heads clear. The swarm feeds on fear as much as flesh. Watch each other's backs. The Emperor does not care for cowards." He paused as one soldier struggled to light a fresh glow stick, the tremor in his hands betraying his calm. Karsk took it, lit it with a practiced flick, and pressed it back between the man's lips. "Steady. We die standing." Above, flares arced across the sky, their red glow bathing the plain in eerie light. Shadows danced long across the earth, stretching like claws. Each guardsman knew that beyond that light, in the horizon's black expanse, something moved. Something waited. The Auspex confirmed it within the hour. A wall of signals, stretching wider than the machine spirit could even process, moved inexorably toward their position. A living tide. Brother Altheon, the Devastator, muttered a litany as he reloaded his heavy bolter. The metal sang with the promise of slaughter. "They come in countless numbers, Captain. I will need resupply within the first hour." "You will have it," Varos replied. He turned his gaze skyward, noting the faint streaks of fire descending, more spores, more monstrosities. "And when you falter, brother, the line will falter with you. You are the wall. Do not break." The guards' artillery answered the tension with thunder. Basilisks launched barrage after barrage into the distance, the shells whistling overhead before detonating in towering firestorms. The night horizon glowed orange, the echoes rolling across the plain like the roar of some ancient beast. For a brief time the sight heartened the mortals. Each detonation seemed like proof that the Emperor's might still held. But then, as silence fell between volleys, faint cries rose on the wind, high-pitched, alien, layered in 1,000 throats, a chorus of hunger. Private Bren, the youngest of Karsk's squad, pressed his helmet tighter against his ears. "Saints preserve us," he whispered. Karsk gritted his teeth. He remembered other wars, the stink of orc blood, the echo of traitor war cries, but nothing had ever made his bones feel this brittle, this small.
He forced his voice calm. "They're just beasts, Bren, nothing more. Beasts can be killed." But even as he said it, the ground shivered beneath their boots. Captain Varos lifted his helm, locking it into place. His voice, magnified through Vox, rang across the trench line. "Soldiers of the Imperium, tonight we face not beasts, but the embodiment of hunger itself. They will come for your flesh, your blood, your very souls. And yet we will hold, not for ourselves, but for every world that watches us now in silence. Stand firm, for the Emperor sees you. He judges you." The guardsmen raised their last guns in salute. Some shouted prayers, others curses. All stood ready. The first wave had been a taste. What was coming now was the feast.
The night shattered with screams. It began at the forward trench, a mile ahead of Karsk's position, where Auspex had tracked the leading edge of the swarm. Guardsmen braced behind sandbags and ferrocrete, lasguns raised, bayonets gleaming under flare light. They never stood a chance. The ground erupted in a spray of dirt and stone as gaunts poured from hidden tunnels, scything claws cutting men apart before they could even fire. Vox traffic flared with panic screams, brief staccato bursts of lasfire echoing before being drowned out by alien shrieks. Then silence, total, smothering silence. "Forward trench is gone," the Auspex operator gasped, his face ghostly pale in the lumen glow. Karsk's gut clenched, but his voice stayed steady. "All squads stand to, fix bayonets, hold until you see their eyes." Flares arced skyward once more, red light washed across the plain. For an instant, the horizon seemed empty. Then shadows moved, scuttling, writhing, countless shapes low to the ground, advancing with insectile precision. The swarm had arrived. "Fire!" Commissar Haldane's voice rang out, sharp as a whip. The trenches blazed red. Lasfire erupted in disciplined volleys, streaking across the night to cut down the leading gaunts. Bodies fell, limbs sheared away, ichor spraying into the dirt. Heavy bolters thundered from the Space Marine lines, detonating targets in bursts of gore. Mortars shrieked overhead, exploding amid the swarm with thunderous finality. For a moment, the defense seemed unbreakable. Then the gaunts hit the wire. The razor coils meant to slow the enemy barely hindered them. The creatures hurled themselves forward, shredding their own bodies to tear gaps through which the rest flooded. Screeches drowned out the disciplined lasfire as the Tyranids crashed into the trench line. Bayonets clashed against talons, lasguns fired point-blank into snapping maws. Guardsmen fought with desperation, training giving way to primal survival. A single misstep meant dismemberment. A single hesitation meant death. Sergeant Karsk drove his bayonet into the throat of a gaunt, ripping the weapon free in a spray of ichor. Another leapt at him, and he fired his las pistol into its skull, the flash painting his face in crimson light. He bellowed for his squad, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line! The Emperor sees us!" And for a time, they did. His men fought like lions, every strike precise, every volley coordinated. Private Bren, though trembling, placed shot after shot into the Xenos that clambered over the trench lip. Corporal Dyron hefted a flamer, washing the forward ground in burning promethium that turned screeching gaunts into blackened husks.
Above, the asteroids joined the fray. Assault marines dropped from the skies, chainswords roaring, carving swaths through the alien tide. Their movements were balletic in their brutality, a dance of ceramite and blood. Bolter fire rained from the higher trench, each round an explosive punctuation against the alien chorus. Yet still the Tyranids came. The first breach erupted near Sector 8, where a knot of gaunts overran a heavy stubber team. I heard the distant screams, the sound of flesh tearing before the Vox went dead. Seconds later, the swarm flooded through the gap, bodies tumbling into the trench like a river bursting its banks. Captain Varos was already there, relic blade cleaving through monsters with every swing. His plasma pistol barked blue fire, reducing foes to steaming ruin. His command squad formed a bulwark around him, their presence holding the line by sheer force of will. But even Varos's voice carried a weight of grim truth. They are testing us. This is not their full strength. Brace yourselves, brothers. The night has only begun.
The first warning was the sky. At 2:14 local, Auspex alarms wailed across every trench and strong point. The heavens above, once a black dome broken only by flares and streaking lasfire, erupted into fire. Thousands of incandescent trails cut through the atmosphere, each one a falling star that screamed of doom. Mycetic spores, living pods of chitin and flesh, plummeted toward the surface in numbers beyond comprehension. Impact in 60 seconds, the tech marine intoned, his mechan dendrites flexing as he interfaced with the Auspex. His calm metallic voice was inhumanly steady. Vectors, entire hemisphere. This is not an incursion. This is planetary consumption. Captain Varos's response was iron. Then we begin the counter-consumption. Prepare all units for impact. The ground shook violently as the first spores struck. Massive sacs ruptured on impact, disgorging creatures by the dozen, gaunts shrieking as they scrambled across the dirt, gargoyle broods unfurling wings slick with ichor, and other shapes too grotesque to describe, their forms shifting as though the biomass had not yet decided what horrors they would become. The Imperial Guard artillery fired desperately, basilisks belching thunder, earth shakers sending flaming shells into the descending rain. Many spores burst mid-air, scattering burning fragments and writhing chitin across the battlefield. But for every one destroyed, 100 landed intact. Sergeant Karsk felt the trench shake beneath him as a pod slammed down only 50 meters away, cracking open like an egg. A Carnifex clawed its way free, towering over the trench line, its carapace steaming, its eyes glowing with predatory malice. "Saints above," whispered Private Bren, his lasgun shaking in his grip. "Fire!" Karsk roared. Dozens of las beams struck the beast, scarring its armor but failing to bring it down. Heavy bolter fire slammed into its chest, detonating chunks of flesh, but still it advanced, bellowing a roar that rattled the bones of every man in the trench. The Carnifex charged. and it was met head-on by the Angels of Death. Assault Marines ignited their packs, soaring up and around the beast. Chainswords hacked at joints, power fists smashed into chitin, and meltaguns burned glowing holes into its hide. The monster flailed, crushing one Marine against the earth with a swipe of its claws, but the others pressed the attack relentlessly. Finally, Captain Veros himself leapt into the fray, his relic blade cleaving deep into the Carnifex's skull. It fell with an earth-shaking crash, ichor spraying like a fountain. For a fleeting moment, the trench erupted in cheers, but the victory was drowned in the chorus of 1,000 more screeches. Everywhere, spores burst open and fresh nightmares poured forth. Warriors with bone swords and lash whips, broods of gaunts carrying symbiotic guns that spat acid, gargoyles swarming the skies in chittering clouds. The Imperial Guard fought with desperate professionalism. Heavy weapon teams rotated fire with precision, las cannons cutting through warriors, flamers vomiting burning promethium into choked choke points. Commissars executed those who wavered, their bolt pistols barking reminders of Imperial discipline. Still, the swarm pressed in. Brother Altheon's heavy bolter roared until the barrels smoked, shells tearing through flesh and bone in an endless storm. "He will not yield," he thundered, voice amplified across the line. "The wall holds." And for a time it did. But then came the shock of the ground itself splitting apart. Entire sections of trench collapsed as burrowing creatures, raveners, erupted from below, dragging screaming guardsmen into the earth. Vox units shrieked with overlapping cries, dozens of squads overwhelmed at once. Karsk shot one of the beasts point blank, its head detonating in a spray of gore. But another burst up beside him, jaws snapping. Only a bolt round from Veros's plasma pistol saved him, vaporizing the monster in a burst of blue fire. "Stay alive, Sergeant. You will need to tell others how men fight when gods stand among them." Karsk swallowed hard, nodded, and raised his lasgun again. Above them, the spores still fell. The night sky had become a rain of monsters, and in the far distance, silhouetted against fire and ruin, something vast stirred in the dark.
The plain had become a slaughterhouse. Lasfire lanced across the darkness in brilliant crimson sheets, striking down gaunts by the dozens, yet it was like throwing sparks into an ocean. The swarm simply kept coming. Each trench was a maelstrom of claws, screams, and the staccato crack of weapons fired point blank. Sergeant Karsk barked orders without pause, voice hoarse, every syllable a lifeline. "Shift fire left, watch the flank, keep them off the Vox crew." He squeezed his trigger until his lasgun overheated, smoke rising from the vent ports, the scent of ozone stinging his nostrils. Around him, the guard fought like professionals drilled to perfection. Heavy weapon teams rotated fire arcs with clockwork precision. Grenades were thrown in calculated intervals, and flamers burst into life at just the right moment to engulf advancing gaunts in firestorms. Discipline turned chaos into structure, at least for a while. But against Tyranids, structure meant little.
A shriek split the air as gargoyles dove from the sky, wings beating like leather thunder. They crashed into the trenches in a wave of snapping jaws and slashing claws, cutting through guardsmen before last fire could bring them down. Commissar Haldane personally cut one from the air with his power sword, his bolt pistol roaring as he executed another soldier whose nerve broke under the assault. He bellowed, "Cowardice feeds the swarm. Stand or be purged." The Space Marines anchored the line with divine fury. Brother Altheon's heavy bolter spatting endless stream of explosive death, the weapon chattering like a god of war. Assault Marines slammed down wherever the defenses faltered, their chainswords tearing through Xenos flesh in sprays of ichor. The discipline of the guard bought time, but it was the fury of the Astartes that kept the swarm from breaching entirely. Then the counterattack began. Captain Varro strode through the carnage, relic blade gleaming, voice cutting through the din. "Fourth Company, forward with me! The swarm presses our line, we press theirs harder!" With a roar, the Space Marines surged over the trench parapet. Bolters thundered, each shell detonating with apocalyptic force. Chainswords screamed, tearing bodies apart in fountains of gore. Their charge was unstoppable, a blue tide of ceramite and wrath cutting deep into the chitinous mass. Karsk could only watch in awe as the angels of death carved their way through what no mortal line could withstand. He rallied his men, shouting, "With them, keep the fire on their flanks, do not let the swarm encircle them." And so the guard fired in support, volleys of lass fire stitching red across the night, striking beasts that sought to flank the Ultramarines. Mortars thumped overhead, shells bursting amidst clustered broods, the plain lit with fire and fury. For a moment, it seemed as though the line might truly hold, but the Tyranids adapted. They always adapted. Larger shapes moved within the swarm now, Tyranid warriors, their bone swords flashing, their lash whips snapping through the dark. Their commands rippled through the hive mind, driving gaunts to more precise slaughter. Suddenly, the swarm's chaotic rush shifted into terrifying coordination, cutting off the Marines' angles of advance. "Captain," Brother Sergeant Darren warned as a lash whip crapped around his arm, dragging him into a gaunt pack. He fought free with a roar, severing the whip with his power sword. But the message was clear. The swarm was learning. Even as Varos decapitated a warrior with a sweeping strike, the truth sank in. Every victory was only feeding the hive mind's endless knowledge. Behind the line, the guard artillery thundered again, basilisks firing until their barrels glowed red, the ground shaking under every impact. Each shell scythed through swaths of the swarm, yet it was never enough. Karsk clenched his teeth, slamming a fresh pack into his last gun. He shouted above the storm, voice raw with defiance. "We are Vostroya! We hold until the stars burn out!" Private Bren echoed him, his voice breaking but determined. "For the Emperor!" And the line held, but only by a thread. Because out in the dark, beyond the fires, something colossal moved. Its shadow stretched across the plain, tall as a hab-block, its roar shaking the heavens. The swarm was only the prelude.
The swarm did not relent. It pressed from every direction, each wave stronger, more coordinated than the last. Trenches that had held through the first assaults now overflowed with bodies, their defenders buried beneath chitin and ichor. Vox traffic was a storm of screams, cut off one by one as squads were devoured in the dark. But worse than the noise were the silences.
Entire sectors fell quiet without a single shot fired. No screams, no last words, just silence. Sergeant Karsk knew what it meant even before the Auspex confirmed it. The shadows had arrived. Lictors, the tech marine intoned, his mechadendrites twitching as he scanned the patterns. Stealth organisms, bio-assassins, they infiltrate, decapitate, and sow terror. They are already among us. The words were punctuated by a scream just meters away. A guardsman vanished mid-step, his body yanked into the blackness beyond the trench wall. The only evidence of his fate was a wet tearing sound and the spray of arterial mist across his squad mates. "Form up! Stay tight!" Karsk bellowed. His men shifted into a defensive knot, laser guns sweeping the shadows. Fear coiled in their throats, but training kept their hands steady. From the gloom, a lictor pounced. Its talons flashed, rending a guardsman from throat to groin before he could fire. The others responded instantly, a disciplined volley of laser beams cutting into its hide, burning through carapace. The monster shrieked, thrashing in agony, before collapsing into the mud. The victory was short-lived. More shadows moved. Too many. Brother Elthian swung his heavy bolter toward the darkness, his rounds detonating in thunderous bursts, blasting chunks from unseen shapes. But even his unerring aim could not catch them all. A second lictor leaped from the trench wall, claws outstretched, only to be met mid-air by Captain Varos, who cut it clean in two with a single swing of his relic blade. "Do not falter," Varos roared, his voice amplified through his helm. "They are predators, but so are we." The Space Marines shifted into tighter formation, their overlapping fields of fire turning ambush into slaughter. But even as they butchered the lictors, a new horror descended upon the battlefield. The Tyranid warriors had arrived. Towering above the gaunts, their talons dripped with ichor, their bone swords gleamed in the firelight. They moved with deliberate precision, their lash whips snapping to drive lesser creatures into coordinated waves. The hive mind's will pressed heavier now, a psychic weight that made mortal skulls throb and noses bleed. One warrior dropped into Karsk's trench with a roar. Its talons pierced two guardsmen in a single swipe, lifting their twitching bodies before discarding them like refuse. The squad opened fire at point blank, laser beams scorching its hide. It staggered, but did not fall. Then Dayron, the flamer operator, stepped forward. With a scream of defiance, he unleashed a torrent of promethium into the monster's chest. Fire engulfed it, ichor boiling, carapace splitting in bursts of steaming gore. The warrior shrieked and collapsed, its death scream shaking the trench. Dayron grinned, teeth black with soot, only to be impaled an instant later as another warrior burst from the side, its talon punching through his ribcage. His body was lifted into the air like a banner before being flung aside. "Emperor, damn them all!" Karsk roared, firing until his charge pack emptied. He swapped it by muscle memory, hands steady despite the horror. His men followed suit, their fire precise, cutting into the second warrior until bolter rounds from the Marines tore it apart. For every victory, the price grew steeper.
Guardsmen died in droves, their discipline only slowing the inevitable. Commissar Haldane fought like a man possessed, his power sword cleaving through Xenos as he executed deserters with his bolt pistol. His coat was slick with blood, human and alien alike. But Karsk could feel the tide turning. The swarm wasn't just attacking, it was herding them, probing for weakness, wearing them down. The Auspex screamed again. "New contact!" the operator shouted, voice cracking with terror. "Larger than anything yet, the size of a hab block." The ground trembled as something vast drew near. Captain Varos turned toward the horizon, his blade dripping ichor, his armor scarred with claw marks. His voice was calm, even reverent. "The Hive Tyrant comes." The guardsmen stared into the firelit dark, and for the first time, many prayed not for victory, but for a swift death.
The battlefield shook as the colossal shadow emerged through smoke and fire. A towering monstrosity of chitin and sinew, the Hive Tyrant strode into view, its silhouette lit by the flashes of las and bolter fire. Its wings spread wide, blotting out the stars, each beat a thunderclap of unnatural power. Its screech carried not only across the battlefield, but through the minds of every soul present. Guardsmen staggered, clutching at their helmets, some dropping weapons as blood trickled from their noses. Even the hardened Commissar Haldane winced under the psychic assault. The air reeked of ozone and rot as the warp bled into reality through the monster's presence. Sergeant Karsk forced himself to breathe. This is it. This is the end of the line. But still, his hands did not falter. His squad looked to him, eyes wide with terror, and he steadied them with a single word: hold. The Hive Tyrant descended into the trench line like a god of nightmares, its massive talons carved through defenses, tossing sandbags and men alike as though they were nothing. A guardsman was bisected in a blur of motion, another crushed under a clawed foot. But the Space Marines were ready. Captain Varus charged, relic blade raised, his voice thunderous, "For Macrogge, for the Emperor!" The clash was titanic. The tyrant swung, its bone sword crashing against Varus's relic blade, the impact shaking the earth. Sparks and ichor flew in equal measure. The captain struck back with precision, every swing driven by centuries of training and the wrath of the Imperium. His blade carved chunks of carapace from the beast, but the tyrant only roared louder, pressing harder, its movements impossibly fast for its size. Around them, the Fourth Company fought like demigods. Assault Marines leapt onto the creature, chainswords tearing into its wings, trying to ground it. Heavy bolters pounded its hide, detonations cracking open its armor. Every Marine moved with flawless coordination, their strikes a symphony of destruction. And yet, the tyrant endured. A psychic scream ripped through the minds of all nearby, forcing lesser guardsmen to their knees. Vox units crackled, overloaded by the sheer force of the synaptic command. The swarm surged anew, driven into frenzy by their overlord's will. Gaunts hurled themselves heedlessly into fire, clogging gun barrels with their bodies, swarming trenches in suicidal waves. Karsk and his squad fired until their rifles overheated, the smell of scorched flesh and promethium clogging the air. "Private Bren," shouted voice ragged, "we're out of packs." Karsk tossed him his last one, never breaking rhythm. "Make every shot count." He obeyed, his hands steady as he fired, cutting down gaunts even as tears streaked his soot-stained face. Then came the moment that would mark the night forever.
The tyrant's talon pierced Brother Sergeant Darren, lifting the Marine from the ground. His armor screeched as the claws crushed into ceramite. Blood streamed from his mouth, but he did not falter. With his last breath, he jammed a crack grenade into the monster's chest. "Burn, abomination," he rasped. The grenade detonated, blowing a crater into the tyrant's side, spraying ichor across the battlefield. Darren's body was hurled lifeless into the mud, his sacrifice marking both triumph and tragedy. Beast staggered, but did not fall. Its roar shook every soul to the marrow, a sound of rage and hunger, unending. Captain Varus pressed the attack, his relic blade biting deep into the wound, splitting chitin with each strike. "It bleeds! Brothers, strike harder!" But the tyrant lashed out with preternatural speed, its bone sword smashing aside 2 Marines, sending them crashing into the trench wall in broken heaps. Another was swatted out of the air like an insect, his jump pack exploding in a plume of fire. For every wound they inflicted, the beast demanded a price in blood. Even the guard contributed, pouring las fire into the creature despite the futility. Their beams left blackened scorch marks. Their grenades erupted against its carapace. Nothing seemed enough, yet they refused to stop. Because in that moment, it wasn't about killing the tyrant. It was about standing with the Emperor's chosen, about refusing to break even in the face of the galaxy's hungriest horror. Karsk found himself screaming alongside his men, voice breaking, lasgun bucking in his hands. "Fire! Fire until the Emperor calls us home!" And for a heartbeat, it seemed as though the tyrant might truly fall. Until the earth shook again. More shadows emerged beyond the tyrant, vast and terrible. Carnifexes lumbered forward, their armored hulks blotting out the horizon, biocannons glowing with lethal energy. The battle had reached its next stage. The true storm was only just beginning.
The night erupted in thunder as the Carnifexes joined the slaughter. Each beast was a walking fortress of muscle and chitin, biocannons swelling with bioplasma that screamed across the battlefield in arcs of green fire. The first blast tore a trench apart, incinerating a full squad of guardsmen in a heartbeat, their screams drowned by the detonation's roar. Sergeant Karsk hit the mud as another impact shook his position, the shockwave hurling men and earth alike into the air. He spat blood and forced himself upright, lasgun in hand, ears ringing. Around him, the survivors scrambled to regroup, fear etched into every face. "Stay in cover! Focus fire!" he roared. His men obeyed, firing at the nearest Carnifex, even as its thick armor absorbed the hits. The las fire did little more than scorch its hide, but they kept shooting because the alternative was despair. The Ultramarines met the threat head-on. Brother Ulthion's heavy bolter thundered, explosive shells tearing craters in a Carnifex's carapace. Assault Marines leapt upon another, chainswords digging into its armored plates as they sought vulnerable joints. Captain Varos, still locked in combat with the Hive Tyrant, spared no glance at the new arrivals. His trust in his brothers was absolute. A Carnifex barreled toward the trenches, its charge like a living avalanche. Commissar Haldane stood firm, his bolt pistol snapping shot after shot into its eyes. "Stand, men of Vostroya! To falter is to feed the beast!" His power sword crackled, defiance embodied. The Carnifex slammed into the trench, crushing defenders beneath its bulk. Guardsmen screamed as claws the size of scythes reaped lives in swaths.
But Kosk's squad responded with precision. Bren hurled a frag grenade into its maw, detonating with a wet explosion that staggered the beast. The flamer operator, a replacement after Dayrun's fall, unleashed burning promethium, black smoke and ichor boiling into the night. Then the true firepower came. "Basilisks, fire for effect!" The order came across the Vox, ragged but clear. An instant later, the ground split as heavy shells screamed down, exploding amidst the swarm. One Carnifex disappeared in a storm of fire and steel, torn apart by direct hits. Another was crippled, its legs shattered, ichor pouring in rivers as it shrieked in pain. The guard's artillery was the Emperor's wrath incarnate, and for a brief moment, the impossible seemed survivable. But the swarm never faltered. As Carnifexes fell, fresh waves of gaunts filled the gaps, throwing themselves heedlessly into the killing fields. From above, gargoyles swooped again, diving into trenches, dragging men away screaming. Warriors pressed forward, driving the lesser creatures like shepherds of death. And always, the hive tyrant loomed, its psychic scream guiding the tide, its bone sword clashing ceaselessly with Captain Varos's relic blade. Karsk fired until his lasgun clicked dry. He slammed in his final pack, whispering a prayer as he did so. "Emperor, guide my aim. Let my death buy a heartbeat more for mankind." Nearby, Private Bren's weapon overheated. He dropped it with a curse, then grabbed a fallen comrade's las pistol and fired point-blank into a gaunt's skull. His hands trembled, but he did not stop. "Still with us in the darkness," Karsk growled through gritted teeth. Bren met his gaze and nodded once, pale but resolute. That moment of grim solidarity carried them as the next horror arrived. The ground cracked, something vast pushed up from beneath, soil and stone vomiting skyward. Guardsmen screamed as a monstrous Mawloc burst from the earth, its cavernous jaws swallowing a dozen soldiers in a single bite. Trenches collapsed under its bulk, swallowing men alive. "Contact below!" the tech marine roared over the Vox. "Burrower strain!" The battlefield was no longer a front line. It was a three-dimensional killing field, with death descending from above, rushing from the front, and erupting from below. Captain Varos drove his blade deep into the hive tyrant's chest, ichor spurting in torrents. For the first time, the monster recoiled, wings faltering, psychic pressure wavering. "Brothers, now!" Varos cried. The Ultramarines surged, hammering the tyrant with bolters, melters, and chainswords. The beast howled, wounded but unbowed. And as the tyrant staggered, its will faltered, just long enough for the swarm's coordination to flicker. Gaunts hesitated, gargoyles scattered, warriors snarled in confusion. It was the moment they had been bleeding for. But Karsk saw in the shadows beyond a new tide rising, larger and darker still. The swarm was unending. For every creature slain, a dozen more surged forward. The line was holding, barely, but the Emperor's angels and his guard alike were reaching the breaking point. The question was no longer if they could win. It was how much they could endure before they broke.
The Mawlocs' emergence tore the battlefield asunder. Entire sections of trench collapsed into the abyss it left behind, burying guardsmen alive beneath tons of soil and rubble. The beast reared back, its mouth a cavern of fangs and writhing tongues, before plunging down again, tunneling beneath the lines like a serpent of nightmare. Sergeant Karsk pulled himself from the rubble, coughing up blood and dust. His lasgun was gone, buried beneath the collapse, but he found a fallen comrade's weapon and snatched it up without hesitation. Around him, what was left of his squad staggered upright, their eyes wide with shock, but their discipline intact. "Form line!" he barked, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Check weapons! We hold, no matter what comes out of that hole!" They obeyed, battered but unbroken. That was the Vostroyan way. Then the hive tyrant screamed again. It was wounded, ichor streaming from its chest, where Captain Varos's relic blade had bitten deep, but the monster's psychic cry was stronger than ever. It reverberated through the air like a war horn of the abyss, rallying the swarm into fresh frenzy. The carnifexes surged forward, biocannons belching gouts of corrosive fire, even as gaunts hurled themselves heedlessly into guard and marine lines. The Ultramarines did not yield. Brother Alfion's heavy bolter barked without pause, shells reducing gaunts to ruin. Assault Marines swarmed across a carnifex, tearing into its throat with chain blades until the beast collapsed in a quaking heap. Every motion was executed with ruthless precision, a testament to centuries of training and devotion. Captain Varos pressed the attack against the tyrant, his relic blade flashing arcs of silver against the beast's bone sword. Sparks lit the dark with every strike. He fought not as a man, but as an avatar of war, his presence the anchor of the line. Still the cost mounted. Brother Sergeant Corvus was caught by a carnifex's charge, his body crushed under its bulk, despite his storm shield. 2 guardsmen were flung into the air by a lash whip, their screams cut short as gaunts ripped them apart before they hit the ground. Commissar Haldane fought like a lion, his coat and blade soaked in blood, his bolt pistol roaring as he executed both Tyranid and coward alike. And then, without warning, the Mawloc erupted again, this time directly beneath the artillery positions. The shockwave was apocalyptic. Earth geysered into the air as the colossal beast swallowed the artillery positions whole, its jaws closing around a full tank, crushing it like a toy. The basilisks that survived the initial collapse were torn apart by scything claws or dragged into the abyss. The guard's heaviest fire support was gone in an instant. On the Vox, the screams of the artillery crews cut through the din, then went silent one by one. Karsk's heart clenched, but he did not let it show. His men needed strength, not despair. "We fight with what remains," he growled. "We are the Emperor's wrath now." Private Bren, his face streaked with grime and blood, nodded firmly despite the terror in his eyes. "Then let's burn them all!" The Tech Marine, his mechanodendrite sparking from damage, intoned a prayer to the Omnisia as he brought a damaged las cannon back to life. Its beam punched clean through a warrior's skull, bursting it in a spray of ichor. Even broken, the machine spirit obeyed. The battle had become a maelstrom of fire, blood, and screams. No front, no rear, only survival in every direction. Above it all, the hive tyrant roared, wings snapping wide. It launched itself into the sky, only to crash down amidst the trenches, crushing men under its bulk. Its bone sword swept, severing bodies, its talons impaling Marines, tossing them aside like broken dolls. And yet, Captain Varos met it head-on once more, his voice unshaken. "You will fall, beast. By blade or by fire, you will fall."
His brothers surged with him, their bolters roaring, chain swords screeching. Even the guardsmen rallied, their lasguns spitting red fire into the tyrant's hide. For one heartbeat, man and Astartes stood shoulder to shoulder, united in defiance against a nightmare that should not be fought, let alone faced with mortal hands. And in that heartbeat, the unthinkable happened. The tyrant staggered. Captain Varros's relic blade pierced deep, ichor gushing like a river. The monster shrieked, its psychic scream faltering, its grip on the swarm breaking. The line erupted in a single deafening cry. "For the Emperor!" But as hope flared, Karsk felt it die just as swiftly. His blood turned to ice as the Auspex operator screamed over the Vox. "Multiple contacts, larger than Carnifexes, approaching fast! Emperor, save us! It's Tyrannifexes!" The shadow of the swarm grew darker still.
The battlefield groaned beneath the advance of the Tyrannofexes. Each beast was a mountain of chitin and muscle, their armored hides glistening under the light of burning trenches. Their biocannons, immense organic weapons the size of tanks, pulsed with venomous energy, dripping corrosive ichor that hissed as it struck the earth. Every step they took was deliberate, inexorable, as though nothing in the galaxy could halt their march. The first shot came with a sound like the tearing of reality. A massive gout of acidic bioplasma screamed across the field, striking a trench line and dissolving it in an instant. Guardsmen became steaming puddles of flesh, their screams short-lived as their armor and bones melted away. The air filled with the stench of burning meat and chemical rot. Sergeant Karsk forced his gaze forward, even as horror clawed at the edges of his mind. "Do not look away," he barked. "Shoot while you still have strength." Lasfire erupted again, a futile hail against living fortresses. The beams left little more than scorched marks across the Tyrannofex's chitin. Still, the guardsmen fired, because not firing was worse. The Ultramarines shifted formation instantly, discipline sharper than any blade. Heavy weapons were redirected, crack missiles streaking across the battlefield to detonate against the advancing monsters. One Tyrannofex reeled as a missile punched through a vulnerable joint, but it did not fall. Its roar was guttural, primal, the sound of hunger made flesh. Captain Varros, his armor slick with Tyranid ichor, turned to his brothers. "Strike the weak points. Bring them down before they breach the line." His voice cut through the din like steel. Brother Altheon pivoted his heavy bolter, rounds detonating against one of the beast's eyes, blasting gore across its armored face. Assault Marines launched into the air, their jump packs flaring as they descended upon the Tyrannofexes with chainswords and power fists. The clash was apocalyptic, Ceramite against Carapace, faith against hunger. But the Tyrannofexes were more than monsters. They were siege engines of the swarm. One swiped with a massive claw, smashing 2 Marines into paste, their blood spraying across the trench wall. Another unleashed a barrage of spore mines, organic shells that arced through the air and exploded amidst the guard positions. Men were torn apart, their bodies flayed by living shrapnel.
Commissar Halden stood atop the trench wall, bolt pistol roaring as he bellowed over the carnage. "Hold! Hold, damn you! Better to die in fire than live in shame!" His power sword crackled as he cut down a gaunt that leapt for his throat. His presence alone was enough to anchor terrified men, though fear still gnawed at every heart. Karsk saw Bren reload with shaking hands, his face pale but set with grim determination. The boy muttered prayers between bursts of fire, his voice trembling. Karsk gripped his shoulder, steadying him. "If we fall together." The ground convulsed again. The Mawlocs surged upward once more, its titanic bulk smashing into the guard rear positions. Entire squads were swallowed in its cavernous maw, their screams muffled by its gullet. It twisted, its hide deflecting lasfire, before burrowing back into the earth with terrifying speed. The ground it left behind collapsed into a fresh crater, swallowing more defenders whole. The battlefield was no longer a line of battle, it was a graveyard in motion. Yet the Imperium did not break. Varos led his brothers in a direct assault against the nearest Tyranofex. His relic blade struck like a thunderbolt, each swing carving deep into its hide. Marines with meltaguns fired point blank as their weapons hissed as superheated beams burned through the beast's armor. With a roar, the creature collapsed, its colossal frame smashing into the earth. The guard cheered, their voices ragged, desperate. For a heartbeat, hope returned. But only for a heartbeat. Another Tyranofex pressed forward, its biocannon spitting acid fire. The shot engulfed a squad of guardsmen, reducing them to bones in a heartbeat. The survivors screamed as the liquid ate through their armor, their flesh bubbling, their lungs filling with burning fumes. And then the hive tyrant roared again. It was still alive, still towering above all, its chest a wound of ichor, but its psychic presence unbroken. The air itself trembled as its will flooded the swarm once more. The gaunts surged with renewed frenzy, warriors howled commands, gargoyles dove from the skies in black clouds. The swarm was endless. Karsk knew the truth then. They weren't fighting to win, they were fighting to endure. He raised his weapon high, his voice carrying above the carnage. "For Vostroya! For the Emperor! Let them choke on our blood before we yield!" His men answered, lasfire flashing once more, defiance burning even as the swarm pressed closer. And in the shadows beyond the Tyranofexes, darker shapes stirred. Something older, something worse. The hive was not done yet.
The swarm shifted. It was subtle at first, a tremor in the air, a ripple through the hive mind's chorus. Then the battlefield itself seemed to recoil, as if the Tyranids were parting to make way for something greater. From the dark came a sound like the tearing of worlds, a screech so vast, so ancient, it clawed into the marrow of every soul. Guardsmen dropped to their knees, clutching their helmets. Even seasoned Vostroyans, who had stood unflinching against Carnifex charges, now sobbed and prayed. Through the smoke they emerged. Hierodules. Two of them, titanic bio-titans striding with monstrous grace. Each was the size of a hab block, bristling with organic cannons that pulsed with sickly light. Their claws could split a lemon russ in two, their armored hides thicker than fortress walls. Where they walked, the swarm surged in perfect unison, their presence amplifying the hive mind's power until the air itself screamed with psychic static. Sergeant Karsk stared, his lasgun suddenly meaningless in his hands. He forced himself to speak, his throat dry. Steady, steady, we are Vostroya, and we stand. But the words felt hollow. The first Hierodule fired. A torrent of bioplasma slammed into a trench line, disintegrating men and fortifications alike. Dozens vanished in a single flash of screaming light. The second followed with a barrage of spore blasts, the organic missiles arcing through the air to detonate amidst artillery remnants. What was left of the guards' rear echelons dissolved into fire and gore. Captain Varos did not flinch. His voice carried across the Vox, iron in the storm. "Fourth Company, redeploy. We take their heads or die upon their claws. Ultramarines, with me." The Astarte surged forward, fearless even in the face of apocalypse. Crack missiles streaked toward the giants, detonating across their carapaces in gouts of fire. Melta-guns hissed, boiling armor, carving deep wounds. Assault Marines hurled themselves at the Hierodules' legs, chain blades tearing at joints. But even the might of the Adeptus Astartes seemed small before such leviathans. One Hierodule swiped with a claw the size of a chimera, obliterating 3 Marines in a single stroke. Another stomped, crushing an entire trench section and the guardsmen within. Their cannons roared again, each shot erasing dozens of lives. Still, the Imperium fought. Commissar Haldane stood atop the rubble, bolt pistol snapping, voice unwavering. "Look at them! Monsters, nothing more! Will you let monsters unmake humanity, or will you stand as men should?" He swung his power sword into a gaunt that leapt for him, bisecting it in a spray of ichor. His defiance was a beacon in the storm. Karsk and his men fired into the Hierodules, their las beams pinpricks against titanic hides. It did nothing, but they kept shooting, because that was all they had left. Private Bren's weapon finally clicked empty. He looked to Karsk, face pale, lips trembling. "Sergeant, it doesn't matter, does it? We can't kill that." Karsk met his gaze, his own soul burning with defiance. "It matters, because we are still alive, and while we are, we fight." The words steadied the boy. He grabbed a fallen Marine's bolt pistol, hands shaking as he aimed it at the advancing swarm. Then, a miracle. A basilisk, somehow spared from the Mawlocs' rampage, roared to life. Its crew, bloody but unbowed, unleashed shell after shell into the closest Hierodule. The monster staggered, ichor gouting from fresh craters torn into its carapace. Marines seized the opening, crack charges slamming into the wounds, detonating with thunderous force. The Hierodule roared, falling to one knee. "For the Emperor!" Varos thundered, his relic blade driving into the beast's chest. His brother swarmed its flank, meltas and chainswords ripping it apart. With an apocalyptic shriek, the Hierodule collapsed, shaking the battlefield as its bulk struck the ground. Hope flickered again, ragged, desperate, but alive. But the second Hierodule pressed forward, unbowed. Its cannons spat ruin, its claws reaping lives. And behind it, more shadows gathered in the smoke. Tyranid monstrosities without end. The guard and the Marines had slain a god beast, but the swarm had more to give. And the night was far from over.
The first Hierodule's carcass still smoldered when the swarm pressed in again. Its corpse was no victory monument. It became a feeding ground, lesser creatures gnawing at its flesh, reclaiming biomass for the hive mind. The sight broke men's hearts. To the Tyranids, nothing was sacred, not even their own titans. The second Hierodule advanced with earth-shaking strides, its every movement a dirge of annihilation. Its cannon spewed fresh waves of plasma, vaporizing entire platoons in arcs of burning ruin. The trench line disintegrated before it, the air thick with screams, ash, and the stench of cooking flesh. Sergeant Karsk dragged Private Bren down as a blast passed overhead, the wave of heat peeling skin from the bodies of those too slow to duck. "Keep low! Keep firing!" he roared, though he knew their lasguns did little more than irritate the Titan. Still, discipline kept the line from collapsing outright. High above, a Thunderhawk screamed through the skies, its fuselage scorched, one engine belching smoke. Within, Captain Varos barked commands into the Vox, his voice unshaken. "By my order, bring it down. We are out of time." The Thunderhawk's nose cannons lit up, pounding the Hierodules back with autocannon fire. Rockets streaked forth, tearing gashes across its armored carapace. For a moment, it staggered, but the beast's roar drowned the battlefield. It spat twin lances of plasma into the heavens, catching the gunship in its path. The Thunderhawk ignited, tumbling end over end, before exploding into a sunburst that rained molten wreckage across the no-man's land. Varus's last Vox transmission cut through the static. "Fight! Hold! The Emperor demands it!" Even the Marines froze at the losset. The Guardsmen, already teetering on despair, seemed ready to break. Commissar Haldane saw it, and he knew what he had to do. He climbed the burning husk of a chimera, bolt pistol raised high, voice booming with unshakable conviction. "You saw them fall, yes? You saw giants brought low. Do you cower now, or will you be remembered as the men who stood?" His words echoed through the battered trenches, pulling broken souls back to their feet. The Guardsmen rose. Some wept, others screamed, but they rose. They fired lasguns until barrels melted, hurled grenades until belts ran empty, fought with bayonets and shovels when their weapons failed. Not because they thought they could win, but because they refused to yield. The Hierodule pressed forward, its bulk smashing through earthworks. Marines hurled themselves at its limbs, planting melta-charges against its joints. The detonation staggered it, tearing deep into sinew and bone. It lashed out, obliterating a dozen Astartes in its rage, but the damage mounted. Karsk felt the ground quake as the Titan lumbered closer. He looked to Bren, the boy's face streaked with grime and blood. "This is it. We'll never see a chance like this again." Bren swallowed, nodding. "Then we take it." The two scrambled across the ruined trench, weaving between corpses and rubble. Ahead, the basilisk clues had loaded their last shell, sweat and blood mixing on their hands. With a final blessing to the Omnissiah, they fired. The shell screamed true, slamming into the Hierodule's chest and cracking its armored sternum. "Now!" Karsk bellowed. Marines surged as one, their crock grenades and melta-charges seeking the wound. Explosions tore the beast's chest wide open. It shrieked, its claws flailing wildly, one sweeping so close that Karsk felt the air ignite around him. Bren didn't hesitate. He hurled the fallen Marine's bolt pistol into the wound, firing as it disappeared into the ichor. The weapon detonated inside the rented flesh, shredding organs in a spray of gore. The Hierodule reeled, its roar turning to a gargle of blood. The Marines struck the final blow. A power fist slammed into its chest, crushing its ruptured heart. With one last howl, the beast toppled, collapsing into the trenches with a thunderous impact that buried men alive and silenced the battlefield. Silence lingered for only a heartbeat. Then came the chittering. From the smoke, fresh horrors emerged. Carnifexes, their claws dripping gore. Warriors, their synaptic cries binding the lesser beasts. Endless gaunts, surging forward to drown the survivors. 2 god beasts lay slain, but the swarm was unending. Karsk leaned against the wreckage, his body trembling, his lasgun empty. Around him, the survivors of the Guard and Astartes formed a ragged line, faces hollow, but eyes burning. Haldane raised his sword, voice raw. "Then we make our stand here. If this is the end, let it be one the hive mind remembers." The swarm surged again, and the Imperium answered. The battlefield was a graveyard of titans and men alike. Smoke clung to the ruined trenches, the stink of promethium mingling with the stench of rotting ichor. The corpses of the slain Hierodules loomed like obscene monuments, steaming as the swarm consumed their remains. Yet still the Tyranids came, an endless tide of flesh, claws, and hunger. Sergeant Karsk staggered to his feet, lasgun useless, his uniform shredded by shrapnel. Around him the remnants of the 19th Vostroyans clung to their posts, fewer than 100 men from the thousands who had stood at dawn. Each face bore the same hollow defiance. They were dead men already, but they would die standing. The Ultramarines had been reduced to a handful of warriors, their ceramitite armor cracked and smoking. Yet even broken, they fought like demigods. Brother Lycon, his right arm torn away, still swung his chainsword with his left, every stroke taking a gaunt apart. Sergeant Cassian planted his banner in the mud, refusing to let it fall. To the guardsmen, that ragged blue standard was more than cloth. It was proof that humanity still defied extinction. The next wave hit like an avalanche. Dozens of carnifexes charged, the ground shaking beneath their armored bulk. Behind them came Tyranid warriors, shrieking commands into the hive mind, their blades dripping with venom. Gaunts poured around them, a tide of screeching, snapping death. "Fire!" Commissar Haldane roared, his bolt pistol spitting shells until the magazine clicked dry. The guardsmen obeyed, lasguns blazing, heavy bolters rattling, plasma guns shrieking until they overheated. Gaunts died in droves, exploding under the rain of fire, but more pressed in, their claws raking at the trenches. The carnifexes hit the line like a hammer. One smashed into the basilisk wreck, tearing it apart as if it were parchment. Another crashed through the guardsmen, sending bodies flying like dolls. Karsk and Bren hurled themselves aside as claws ripped through the earth where they had stood. "Hold!" Karsk screamed, even as the line disintegrated. He raised his bayonet and lunged at a gaunt, stabbing it through the throat. Beside him, Bren fired until his stolen bolt pistol clicked empty, then smashed its butt into a warrior's faceplate before being dragged back by Karsk. The Astartes countercharged. Sergeant Cassian led the last of the Ultramarines into the heart of the carnifexes, relic blade crackling with energy. Their warriors fought like lions, tearing apart the beasts with meltas, grenades, and sheer fury. One Marine grappled a carnifex, plunging a crack grenade into its wound before being crushed in the explosion. Another was impaled, but clung to the beast's back, driving his chainsword down until both toppled. The ground became a slaughterhouse. Marines fell one by one, each taking a mountain of Tyranids with him. Guardsmen fought tooth and nail, stabbing, screaming, dying in the mud. At last, only Karsk, Bren, Haldane, and a handful of guardsmen remained, surrounded on all sides. The swarm paused, circling like predators savoring the final kill. A lone warrior stepped forward, its eyes glowing with alien malice, its blade dripping with ichor. Karsk spat blood and raised his bayonet. "Come on, then. Come take us." The Tyranids screeched as one and surged. The world shook. From the skies came salvation or damnation. A lance strike slammed into the battlefield, reducing hundreds of Tyranids to ash in a single apocalyptic blast. A second followed, gouging a canyon through the swarm. The survivors shrieked, thrashing in panic as the hive mind faltered. Above, the shadows of Imperial Navy warships pierced the clouds, their bombardment lighting the night like a false dawn. Salvation had come. Too late for most.
Haldane staggered to his feet, his coat aflame, his bolt pistol empty. He looked to the skies and bellowed, his voice ragged but unbroken, "The Emperor still watches!" Karsk held Bren upright, the boy barely conscious. Together they stared into the burning heavens, where humanity's warships rained death on the swarm. The field was lost. Their regiment was gone. The Ultramarines lay in the mud, their banner shattered. But the swarm had been halted, if only for a time. And for that fleeting moment, against the endless hunger of the Tyranids, mankind still stood. The night ended, not in victory, but in survival. Of the thousands who had held the line at dawn, fewer than a dozen guardsmen lived to see the bombardment. The Ultramarines who had descended as angels of war were reduced to silence, their bodies interred in the ruin they had defended. The Hiv swarm recoiled under the hammer of the fleet, but none doubted it would return. Tyranids always return. Sergeant Karsk would carry the memory of that day until his final breath. The faces of his men, the roar of the Hierodules, the screams of the dying, the defiance of Commissar Haldane. He would remember the way Bren's trembling hands grew steady in the firestorm, how the boy had stood like a man when it mattered most. He would remember Captain Varos's final words, "Fight. Hold. The Emperor demands it." What does it mean to win in the 41st millennium? To hold for an hour longer than expected? To slay one beast when 100 more remain? To sacrifice everything so that the hive mind must spend just a fraction more biomass to consume you? In truth, victory is not measured in the lives saved, but in the defiance shown, for in defiance lies the essence of humanity. The Tyranids will come again. New worlds will burn, new regiments will fall, new chapters will bleed. And yet, humanity will endure, not because of bolters or lasguns, not because of tanks or fleets, but because of the stubborn will to stand, no matter the odds. For that is the Imperium. That is mankind's curse and mankind's strength.